Let's open the door.
Okay, Robert, I'll control that for now.
And Grace, if you'd like to add a little comment about put comments and questions in the chat box, a little message, that would be great. And Becky, what do you think about waiting until 4:05?
That sounds good.
Yeah, for people to put their bikes away and.
Yeah, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's just give a few more minutes for people to dial in and get connected. Sometimes the virtual connections take a little longer for some, and as Chris mentioned, some people might be taking off their bike helmets. So our guests in the room, your camera and your microphone are intentionally off, so don't be concerned about your system not working. We've got it set up that way, and we'll explain ourselves when we get going on why we're trying to control the amount of input initially, so we flow through our agenda better. And for those of you familiar with the chat function, please note that Grace has entered a note welcoming you, and to please use the chat box to share comments and questions that will be facilitating a Q&A in the last 15 minutes. So while we're waiting one more minute for more people to join, if you've just got a burning question, go ahead and type it in now. And if we haven't answered it by the end of our presentation, we'll be sure to circle back and look through the chat to answer questions at the end.
And Becky, may I suggest that people also just let us know who's online if they just want to introduce themselves in the chat box?
Great. Hey, everyone. So right now, if you would please, in the chat, type your name and if you're affiliated with an agency or a special group that you're representing tonight, please add that as well. All right. Well, it's 4:05, and I want to respect everyone's time and people who dialed in to join us. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. So tonight's program is between 4 and 6, but we're actually breaking it up into 2 back-to-back sessions. So it's actually a 4 to 5 program, which will be repeating from 5 to 6. Again, this is our first open house on the bicycle master plan, and we're really excited to have you participate. Next slide, please. So this is a webinar format, and so we need to have some parameters to make sure that we can have a meaningful meeting. So we do have everyone's cameras and microphones off right now, except for the project team. And the chat box is the best way for you to provide comments at this time and questions. We've got about 35 minutes of presentation, and then we'll be reserving the last 25 minutes for questions and answers. If we're not able to answer all of the questions tonight, we are going to be, please put them in the chat box. If we're not able to address all of them, we will be following up with a written transcript of questions and answers and getting that out to interested parties. And then if you've got any additional questions or comments, please visit the online comment map and survey, and also feel free to contact me, and my contact information is also on the web page. We want to make sure that we have a positive and productive discussion, and so we ask that the tone of your comments be civil. And just a heads up that if we experience offensive language, the participant might be removed by our meeting facilitator. And the best way to stay informed is to sign up for e-updates, which you can do by our webpage. Next slide, please. So I'm happy that we've got so many people in the room, but it's enough that we would eat up a lot of time if we did a round of introductions. So please do type your name into the chat so we know who's in the room. And then I will just have the project team will introduce ourselves to you. So, that was one of our main goals, is to put a face to this project for you to meet us. We'll have some presentation just to give you some background, an overview of the project, some of our existing conditions analysis, a tutorial about the online mapping tool, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. I'm Becky Taylor. I'm a senior transportation planner with Lane County. I've been with Lane County for 5 years, and I'm so excited to be finally working on this bicycle master plan. Chris?
Hi, my name's Chris Wachi. I'm a partner with Cogito. We're a small public engagement firm based here in Eugene.
Grace? Oh, Grace, do you want to introduce yourself?
My apologies, the mute button is hard to find. My name's Grace Steinbach. I'm with Alta Planning and Design. I'm on the consultant team for this project, and I'm so excited to be working on this dream project. So thank you for spending some time with us this evening. We're excited to hear from you. Thanks.
And Derek?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Derek Abe. I'm a transportation planner with Alta Planning and Design as well. And I am on the project management team supporting Becky and the rest of the team here.
And Sasha?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sasha Vartanian with Lane County Transportation Planning. Thank you so much for dedicating an hour of this sunny evening to this project. We're really looking forward to the conversation and the input you'll provide.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the questions that we're prepared to answer tonight with our presentation, some of the more frequently asked questions that we've heard so far in this project is about the scope of our project, whether we're including county roads within the cities of Eugene and Springfield, if we're looking at soft paved paths for mountain or gravel biking, and if we're looking at non-infrastructure recommendations for bicycling. Next slide. So about the project purpose and scope, this is Lane County's first ever bicycle master plan. We identified in our Lane County Transportation System Plan, which we adopted in 2017, that we needed this separate planning process to really get into the analysis with the community about what was needed to support bicycling in Lane County. We will be adopting this bicycle master plan as an amendment to Lane County's transportation system plan. And that will go to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption. And that will enable us to look more closely and potentially modify any of our transportation policies for Lane County, or any projects that we had planned in the transportation system plan, such as shoulder widening on projects. We really want to be intentional and support the community about what they want to see on our roads, whether shoulder widening is supported, just knowing that it's a costly endeavor and that there's natural resource impacts when we widen a shoulder to provide a place for people to bicycle. And so there might be other solutions that we arrive at through discussions with the community, with our technical analysis and input. And we are looking specifically at Lane County system because that's what's directly within our control, and that'll be integrated into our transportation system plan as part of our adoption process. However, we will be looking at connections to off-road systems and working with our regional partners, such as the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, and the cities, so that we can make sure that we've got a plan for addressing connections between our systems. And the goals for our project is we want to have a safe and comfortable system for people who ride bikes and for all roadway users. We've heard a lot already from people driving cars feeling uncomfortable about passing someone on a bike on a narrow lane county road. And we want to have a connected regional system between rural communities for bicycling. And equity is very important to us for providing a convenient, safe, and affordable means of transportation. For several people, bicycling is their only means of transportation. And we've also heard a lot about the economic opportunities associated with bicycle tourism. And then the public health benefits of expanding active transportation, just being able to get out and go for a bike ride and feel safe and get healthier as a result are some of our high level objectives for this plan. Next slide. The plan does cover all of rural Lane County. It's a huge geography outlined in green here, all the way from Florence to the Cascades. And we are specifically not evaluating the network within Eugene, Springfield, but we are working with staff from those cities to make sure that we have a connected system between what we're calling the rural Lane County transportation system and the city system. And the cities, they each have their own transportation system plan and bicycle plans. And so we don't want to rework what they've already established as their vision, but we do want to work closely, just like we would with other partners like Oregon Department of Transportation or like the Forest Service roads, working with those agency partners to make sure that those critical connections for an interconnected system work for everyone. Next slide, please. So the planning context, I mentioned the transportation system plan that we adopted back in 2017. That's a state mandated plan, and it's an extensive analysis of what the existing conditions are of Lane County's transportation system, and it identifies over the next 20 years, what are the projects that are needed to accommodate the needs of our community. And at that time, we heard a lot about bicycling, that there's a lot of need and demand for bicycling and a wider range of potential solutions. And we just did not have enough funding at that time to get into that level of detail. And so we committed through the transportation system plan to do this subsequent planning effort to create a separate bicycle master plan. And it took us several years until now to get the funding to do this bicycle master plan. So I'm very excited about that. And it also complements our transportation safety action plan. One of our key findings, in addition to knowing that bicycling was a big priority to our community through our outreach with the transportation system plan, we learned that safety was our biggest problem with our transportation system, that we have a high number of fatal and severe injury crashes, especially in rural Lane County. And so we developed a complementary plan that looks at more than just engineering solutions like widen a shoulder. It includes enforcement actions and especially education. And so we've already heard from a lot of people through the outreach that they would like us to pay more attention to bicycle safety education. For example, how to safely pass if you're in a vehicle, someone riding a bicycle. And if you're a cyclist, what are some kind of best practices to protect yourself when you're out there on a rural road? So those are on our radar for the planning context that is shaping the work that we're doing. So all of our existing plans and policies and those of our partner agencies, as well as other applicable regulations and the available funding, future funding forecasts, all contributed to us developing a guiding framework. And that guiding framework you can find on our webpage if you want more information. But that helped us, we identified through that research some major themes around safety and comfort, connectivity, equity, tourism, and economic development. And so that's how we arrived at my beginning slide where we talked about the purpose and objectives, kind of the goals of the plan, was an outcome of kind of this guiding framework analysis. And so next you're going to hear from Chris about public involvement, and then you'll hear from Derek about our existing conditions analysis. And what we're going to be doing is taking the public input and the technical analysis together and looking at our guiding framework of what we have to do with what we want to do, with what we need to do, and from that develop recommendations from low cost to high cost with available funding, with if we could get more funding, to what's within our control, to what do we need to figure out with some regional partners. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris to talk about the public involvement component.
Thank you. I wanted to start off with two quick things. One, if you're just joining us, just to reiterate what Becky mentioned, we will be doing this presentation again if you missed the first part at 5 p.m. So there'll be another session. And if you have joined us and you haven't had an opportunity to put your name in the chat box and whom you're representing, that would be helpful because it helps us understand with this particular method, what are the voices that we're reaching. So that's my pitch. I wanted to highlight the Technical Advisory Committee representation. And Becky showed you the map of Lane County. You know, the county has over 4,700 square miles. It is enormous, and through a patchwork of various jurisdictions, city, county, state, federal, tribal lands. So our TAC representation really needed to encompass voices around that, not only for that broad representation, but also to serve as our core team of technical advisors to look at the deliverables and give feedback on them. And they have done a fantastic job, incredibly engaged, and it's been a pleasure working with everyone because there's such energy around this plan because it being the first plan ever. May I have the next slide? So here's a brief overview of the public involvement. And I do want to highlight that we scoped this and planned this out prior to March of last year. So things morphed a bit as we had to adjust our public involvement approach to really still be effective and broad in, amid a pandemic. As I mentioned, we have the Technical Advisory Committee. We started it off with reviewing the public involvement plan, the draft of the plan with some key stakeholders to make sure that we were reaching the intended audiences. If there was other conduits, could we leverage outreach opportunities? And it really gave a depth to the public involvement plan. We have our stakeholder e-updates. If you're not on the list, please put your name in the box or in the chat box, or go online. That is the best way to stay abreast of plan developments, what's coming up, so that you don't miss any opportunity to review or to give comment as we move forward. Right now, we're in the past couple of weeks, we've been doing a series of community stakeholder focus groups, and it represents 7 communities throughout Lane County. And then we coupled it with this session right now, kind of a live open house, so we could capture more folks and have that interactive question and answer period. As you know, we have, I'm just going to jump to the public open house. Right now, we have our online open house from the 8th, 5 days left to spread the word and to provide your comments. And Derek's going to be going in great detail about that in just a moment. The equity approach for targeted outreach, we have some creative and very positive collaborations with local agencies, Homes for Good, St. Vincent de Paul, schools, family resource centers. So we could reach out into communities and provide bilingual hard copies of surveys for those households who might not have a computer. And it's been very, very positive, long-lasting relationships, I think, between this planning project and also future projects to come. So that's been extremely rewarding. I mentioned our first open house right now. In summer, we will have a second online open house. So please, again, sign up for e-updates. And then the next comment period will be the public hearing and comment period prior to presenting it, prior to the board's deliberation on the adoption of the plan. So that is a snapshot of what we've done. And I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A about it. But right now, I'd like to turn it over to Derek so we can start talking about existing conditions.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so I want to walk us through the results of the existing conditions analysis that we just performed. It was a very extensive analysis encompassing a wide range of considerations, and I'll touch on each of these. Really, the objective tonight is to give you a higher level overview of our findings and to help get everyone on the same page about where we are going with this plan as we begin to develop some recommendations and a project list for the proposed Lane County bicycle network. So the core elements of the existing conditions report that we just published, and again, this is all available on the project website, lanecountybmp.com. Encompasses a variety of different analyses. And we started with our understanding, a baseline understanding of what the actual bicycle network looks like today on the ground. And that really helps us to establish, okay, we know there are gaps here, we know there are deficiencies here, we know that there may be bike facilities here that need some improvement, right? And from there, we developed an equity analysis. The equity analysis allows us to get a better understanding of the areas throughout the county that qualify as having higher need, and we'll talk about what I mean by higher need there. But basically, these are areas in the county where folks may not have access to a vehicle, for example, right? And so providing those bicycles facilities is going to be very important for those reasons. Then we did what we call a demand analysis or a suitability analysis, and this gives us a better understanding of where specific areas throughout the county geographically we might anticipate a higher demand for bike facilities, a higher demand for bike ridership. And of course, we did a safety analysis to understand where historically there have been some reports of higher crash rates. And then lastly, we performed what we call a bicycle level of traffic stress analysis, or LTS analysis. And this serves as a way for us to understand the quality of the road network. So in other words, not just how safe it is, but how comfortable it is or how stressful it might be. And we'll talk a little bit more about those results there. All of this enables us to identify some opportunities and constraints moving forward. So again, really establishing the baseline of conditions today and then building on that. So I'll start with the existing county bike network. And this is obviously a zoomed out map, and all of these maps are fairly high level, so you won't be able to see a ton of detail here. But what you can see, some of the trends at this level are that there are existing facilities throughout the county. The vast majority of on-street bike facilities, so bike lanes or buffered bike lanes, sharrows, things like that, are going to be concentrated in the Eugene, Springfield metro area. I don't think that is any surprise to anyone who's traveled or ridden a bike in the county. And then there are some other places where we've got some bike facilities as well. But as you can see, the vast majority of Lane County's network is, a standard roadway with maybe a shoulder, right? What we've gone back and done is look through the previous planning efforts to date to understand what else we could say about this existing network and possibly the proposed network. And so the purple lines that you see on this map that are kind of big and bold there are routes that we've identified through those other planning processes that the county has identified, and that other efforts like the East Lane bicycle tourism study have identified as potential routes that could connect various centers throughout the county. And of course, if you go to the report itself, download the report, you'll find a lot greater detail about specific areas throughout the county. So this is what we call a composite map of our equity analysis, and it's called a composite map because it is accumulation of several different factors. So again, I mentioned households that may not own a car, right? Households that have a certain education level, have a certain income level, are composed of a certain race or ethnicity. All of these factors are compounded for us to get a better understanding of where throughout the county the highest need areas may be. Okay, so and as you can imagine, it tends again to concentrate in the more central cities here, but there are areas throughout the county that also demonstrate higher need, and this allows us to kind of use this as a background for determining where our priorities for planning projects should be. And I'll just to explain the legend here. The higher score refers to a higher need. So the darker areas are those areas where we would look to provide some equity measures. So this is the demand analysis. This is again looking at where people live, where people work, where they recreate, where they go to school, take transit, go shopping, all the things that we tend to make a lot of our daily trips for. And so the areas of higher demand are going to be in your darker blue. And again, you can see it kind of concentrates in the central cities, but all of the sort of connections, the squiggly lines that you see between those are potential routes that we would be considering as higher demand routes. And typically these are going to be the roadways where recreational cyclists are already riding today. And so these are some of the routes that overlap with that, those I previously identified county proposed routes that I had mentioned earlier. Okay, and so lastly, the bicycle level of traffic stress analysis. I know it's a little difficult to see at this scale, but we've color coded the county roads here to reflect the level of comfort that each of these roads have in terms of their roadway condition. So the quality of the bike facility, if there is one, how many lanes there are, the speed of the streets, the volumes on those streets, to get a better understanding of how stressful or how comfortable these roads would be. And you can see that throughout the county, there's a pretty good diversity of roadway quality types. There are some places where, you know, it may be a higher speed county road, but there are so few vehicles traveling on it that it actually feels quite comfortable. Or maybe it has a relatively wide shoulder. In other places, maybe we've got a bike lane or a buffered bike lane, a protected bike lane, something that is going to offer some physical separation for folks that are riding their bikes. And so you can see there that, you know, wherever we see the red lines on this map are the areas that we're going to kind of zoom in and try to get a better understanding of the quality of those street segments. Okay, so the high level summary of all of this, of all of the existing conditions analysis that we've performed, allows us to identify some opportunities and constraints. And in a lot of cases, the opportunities are also the constraints, or the constraints are the opportunities. So, you know, very briefly, what we noticed here is that most of the county's network, the rural network that we're focusing on as a part of this project, are on roadways that are higher speeds, where the statutory speed limit is 55 miles an hour. And, you know, obviously, as a person on a bike, you know, we are not going to feel that comfortable on a roadway that has those speeds. But in a lot of these places, the volumes, the number of cars that are passing people on bikes is so low that it may not be as much of a concern, right? Or there may be a shoulder that's wide enough to give us a little bit of a buffer space between that fast moving traffic. From the demand analysis and from the equity analysis, we generally can understand that these are going to be in the city centers, obviously in the Eugene Springfield area. There's a higher demand for a lot of the destinations where we have the density of those destinations. But then there are also places throughout the county where we might not expect there to be demand, and our analysis shows that those are areas that we should be looking at as well. Of a lot of importance, we've heard this in a lot of the comments we've received so far. You know, is the value and the importance of us thinking through what the connections look like, not just within cities, but between cities and between centers. What does the transition from the urban environment look like as we progress into the rural environment, or from a suburban environment into a rural environment, right? Not just the types of facilities, but the cycling environment, the bicycling environment. How does it feel? Who are we actually going to be able to accommodate with the types of facilities there? And you know, this is, as Becky mentioned, a project with a funding that isn't unlimited, right? We have to be really strategic about how we prioritize our projects. And so we're going to be relying on a lot of this analysis to guide us, to direct us in, at least on the technical side, developing some recommendations for the network. The input that we receive as a part of this public process will also feed into that. And that is going to help us to better understand what the data might not tell us, right? So again, we are all encouraging you to go to the website, take the survey, and tell us a little bit more about the places that you're familiar with that could use some improvement. So with that, I am going to launch into a brief tutorial of our online survey and interactive mapping tool to get you a little bit more familiar with the mapping and survey environment that we've prepared here.
And Derek, could I just chime in? It's
Sure.
just give you a little time check. It's 4:35. So we want to make sure we have a good period of time to, thanks.
Great. So I will walk through this here now. So this is our project website, lanecountybmp.com. And on the homepage, you'll see a link to the virtual open house there. So you click that link. And that will take you to our survey. It's a very brief introduction. You click on this button here and it asks you a handful of questions, takes less than 5 minutes. This will give us a better understanding of who's actually thinking and concerned about bicycle travel throughout the county. Gives us a better understanding of the folks that we're interacting with and are giving input. You submit that survey. You can also have the option of skipping that survey. I'm going to skip that here for us today. And then that brings you to our interactive mapping steps. So there are 2 steps here. But before I get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about the mapping environment and what you see on the right here. So you can see that there are a lot of comments already entered. You can hide those comments if that's a little jarring for you. But the mapping environment is really intended to give you a more personalized view of the areas in the county that you may be familiar with. So you can zoom in, just like Google Maps. You can turn on a number of different layers. There's a satellite layer if that would help you to better place yourself. The most important layer here is the county roads layer, and that is a blue road network that you can see here. That will enable you to kind of reference what's on the county network and what isn't. What can we recommend as proposed improvements as a part of this project, and what might we need to consult some of our agency partners with, like ODOT, for instance, when it might be on their network, right? So you can zoom in and fly around and locate yourself and get a better sense of where you are in the county. Step 2 asks you to do that very thing, zoom into where you're familiar with and find a road that you have some sort of experience with, you may have concerns about. You can click on that road, any one of these blue segments, and you can tell us a little bit more about that. You currently ride there, you would like to, but you don't because you have some concerns, or you can leave a general comment. That will populate a box on the left, and you can tell us a little bit more about the conditions there. Okay, so that is for the county network. Now, if you want to turn on a number of these other layers, these are some of those existing conditions analysis mapping that we did for reference. So you can turn that on and you will see where the higher demand areas are by toggling that on and off. Pretty straightforward. There's a legend in the top right corner that will explain what those layers are and what they tell us, okay? Now, and as a part of this input, we realize that county roads aren't gonna take you from point A to B for all of your destinations. We know that they aren't the only roads that you travel on, and that there may be some connections and some key transition points that are important for us to know about that may not be precisely on that county network. So we wanted to give you an opportunity to add some other comments, and that is what you see when you enable the comment feature here. You can add a destination by clicking on this button on the left. You can add a challenge. You can add a driving concern. You can do all 3 of these things to tell us more about various places throughout the county, about your concerns, about what you like and what you don't like, where there are gaps per se, areas where we should be looking to prioritize future bike projects. Okay, and so that is the last step. When you're done with that, you can save your comments, and they should be populated instantly, so you'll see them there, and you can leave as many comments as you like. So we're looking forward to processing all of your input. Again, this is going to be really important to helping us to develop the recommendations in the next phase of the plan. So with that, I am going to transition back to the presentation, and we are going to open up the session for some Q&A.
Great, and I get the pleasure of serving as moderator for this section. So if you could please put questions, even if it's at the very start. What was your name again? kind of question, that's totally fine. The first question is level of stress indicators. What were some of them, Derek?
Yeah, so the level of traffic stress analysis, first off, it's an analysis that's method was determined, has been developed over the years, and has been adopted by ODOT, so the state roadway authority. And it is a method that is specifically intended to give us a better understanding of how stressful that roadway condition is today, right? And there are a number of indicators that we use to paint that composite picture, that full picture of the comfort of that roadway. So the indicators there are things like the speed of the roadway, the volume of the roadway, the number of lanes, the presence, absence, or quality of existing bike facilities on the roadway. And then it also looks at intersection conditions, turn configurations, looks at things to understand what conditions are like when you get to an intersection, right? Because oftentimes the intersections are what we call the weakest link in our route, in our network. That's where things tend to break down. So those are some of the major indicators that the level of traffic stress analysis considers.
Just following up on that discussion or answer, we heard a lot in the focus groups about speed and how speed was a major concern. Could you talk a little bit about the change in percentile of that could have some implications to certain roads in Lane County?
Yeah, so so typically when ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, is looking to establish or change the posted speed limit or statutory speed limit, they undergo what they call a formal process called the speed zone investigation. And that's basically the agency's way of figuring out what is the appropriate speed for a given roadway. And that takes into account a number of things like, sight lines and visibility, the number of cars traveling on the road, the width of the lanes, the general character of the roadway, to determine, what is the appropriate speed that cars should be driving at. One of the biggest factors in that determination is the speed at which 85% or less of vehicles are traveling on that roadway. So it's not an average speed per se, but the speed that most people are traveling at, right? And at 85th percentile is actually and has been criticized for many good reasons, because what that has resulted in is a lot of very high-speed roadways, especially roadways that are not highways, right? Roadways that have a more local character to them, that may be slower, that may be through a main street, roadways that we know cars should be traveling slower on. And so ODOT has begun the process of revising the way that they make that determination by lowering that percentile. So now they're considering what they call the 50th percentile. And that just gives them a lot more flexibility as to what that speed for vehicles should be set at. Mm-hmm. And allows us to have that discussion about lowering speed limits where we feel, as other people using the road, as drivers even, what that speed limit should be.
Great, thank you. Grace, do you have any questions that I may have missed in the chat box?
No, pretty quiet house. I think it might be maybe it's a good idea to ask folks to maybe just provide what their vision of a success for this plan might be. I know that we'd really just love to hear about what this means to you and why this plan is important to you personally. Be really helpful for us.
Yeah. So if you could put those comments in about why this plan is important. I know I recognize a couple folks on the call, and Becky, while that's happening, could you talk a little bit about what's come up a lot, and Derek's touched on it and you've touched on it. What influence could the plan have on that section of road that connects one county road to another county road, where it's this incredibly lovely experience to the next lovely experience?
Yeah, I think what's been so exciting for me to hear from the community is the really simple solutions that just aren't obvious to me. Like, could you please just sweep this shoulder a little more frequently? It really makes my riding experience different day and night. And whether I have to veer out into the travel lane to get out of the way of something. And then other maintenance practices, like please don't use that type of chip seal, or seal it all the way to the shoulder so that the roadway isn't as rough. And then also hearing a lot of feedback about knowing that constructing new infrastructure is so expensive and resources are so limited. It's been really important to hear if we do need to make changes to our roadway, what are the priority areas? So hearing from the community about where we could target our limited resources to have the biggest impact, and where the community would support change. As I mentioned earlier, it's difficult to change roads in the rural environment. There's beautiful trees and wetlands, and there's natural resource impacts that people like to experience the rural countryside, and they don't necessarily want a county road to look, urban, but they want a little bit wider shoulder, so there's a little more separation and comfort as they're riding that road, especially next to a high-speed vehicle. And then about speeds, we've been hearing quite a bit about, please, reevaluate the speed of this roadway, and could you lower the speed? It would really make my riding experience much more safe and comfortable. And then just hearing from people in cars who feel very apprehensive about how to safely pass a vehicle or a bicycle on a narrow roadway. So just really hearing a lot of commonalities in the comments about what people are experiencing, that what I think I'm hearing the most is that people on Lane County roads are rather fearless to be out on their bike. And we want our system to be more accessible to everyone. As a kid growing out north of Coburg, I used to ride my bike on North Coburg Road all the time. And today, if I lived out there, I wouldn't feel safe myself, and I certainly wouldn't let my 10-year-old daughter ride her bike, just because there's a lot more traffic and larger trucks, and there aren't the facilities like a wider shoulder to support that. So I'm really excited about the public comment, and it's really valuable to hear from the community. Please, please, please make the time to visit our comment map and provide comments, because what our technical analysis shows is, oh, that road should be comfortable. There's a wide shoulder. We might hear something really different from the people who actually ride that road every day. And we might hear things that we didn't really know about, like a particular intersection, or place where the shoulder really isn't that usable to bicycles for X, Y, and Z reasons.
And you're getting some comments like that right now from Samantha Duncan, and then some other additional comments about some of those speed areas that may look great on the map, but with the speed so high might have a different experience if you're riding.
Yeah, and Chris, the one other thing that Becky's comment about speeds reminds me of with our safety analysis, that really only takes into account documented, recorded crash histories, right? And we know that that is not capturing all of the crashes, right? And we know that that is not capturing, near misses, close calls, things of that nature. And these are things that we experience as bicyclists, as people on bikes all the time, right? And so when you're able to actually tell us on the map where it isn't safe, whether or not someone has gotten into a crash there or whether or not someone has died there, that bumps it up on our priority list as a place that needs to a closer look at the very least. So it's really important that we try to document that as much as possible.
Mhm. And I see that there's comments from students from LCC and about the safe connectivity. Becky, do you want to say anything about the upcoming project just in that corridor? Just as a quick plug, and then we'll continue.
Yeah, I'm really excited. We got federal funding to undergo a special planning effort on the 30th Avenue corridor in the Lane Community College Basin, specifically to look at how to support active transportation on 30th Avenue. So stay tuned for more information about that.
Thank you. So with LCC, from the higher educational perspective, we also have been reaching out to Lane County's Safe Routes to School Rural Coordinator. So Cassidy Mills has been involved in the conversations too, because many of those schools are on Lane County roads for kids walking and biking near those facilities. So that's been another way of rounding out the conversation. Grace, at Mission Control, is there anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, a lot of really great comments coming in. Thank you guys so much for your input. A couple mentions of talking about connectivity that I think might be interesting for folks to touch on, perhaps Derek, just surrounding our goals with connecting to other types of facilities like multi-use paths or even other roadway networks, and how we're sort of looking at the county road network as that, potential spine, and how we're going to kind of sort of weave navigating amongst these different networks to provide those safe connections to other places.
Yeah, and I think Steve's comment there about the off-road paths and paths and trails in general is a good one and a good question, because oftentimes those paths, those facilities, while they're not on the Lane County network, may be a destination, right? They could be the destination themselves, or they could be a route that makes a connection between the county network or to a city street. And so we're also looking at those because we know in a lot of cases it may not be able to make as direct of a connection on the Lane County network as we would like, right, for a variety of reasons. But there may be some alternatives that we may be able to consider that may be safer, that may be more comfortable, that may be even in some cases more direct, that will require a level of coordination with a lot of our project partners and our agency partners. And so that's why we're coordinating really closely with them. They're on our technical advisory committee. These are folks from all the local cities and, the ODOT, the state authority. We're working with folks from parks and the Forest Service and BLM to make sure that where those conditions exist and that we're taking them into consideration, right? Obviously, we can't spend county funds on those facilities if they're not on the network, but we can at least try to advance those efforts as much as possible, realizing the impact that they would have as part of the larger connectivity throughout the county.
There's a question that kind of harkens rails to trails. Becky, would you like to, do you know if there are old railroad right-of-ways still in existence in the county?
So I do have it on my to-do list to connect with a regional rail representative who serves on the Area Commission for Transportation about how we can incorporate him into our planning process to see if there are any opportunities like that. And I would say that comment and the comments that Derek just made about how we can coordinate with other agencies. I think how all of you in the room can help us is on that comment map. We really appreciate hearing, where Lane County could improve upon its system, but there was also that pin drop feature where you could comment on other facilities, and I think it will really help facilitate those other conversations with other agencies. If you can pinpoint specific locations where you would like to see connections or where the connection is more difficult. For example, we heard a specific ODOT bridge crossing as a pinch point for people, and to the extent that we can really highlight priorities that the community has expressed to us through this planning process to, say, for example, ODOT, knowing they have limited resources too, that will really help us.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. And I think one of those other pinch points that we've heard is right, that Cottage Grove connection on 99. That's come up quite frequently. So we are rapidly coming up to the bewitching 5 p.m. hour, which we will do this whole session again. Is there anyone who has a final comment so that we can wrap up? And you're more than welcome to stay for round 2. If you just didn't get enough of this presentation, please stay. And yes, Evan is the route expert on the Technical Advisory Committee. My summer is planned, thanks to Evan. And so just the final question is, do you envision the interactive map being a permanent feature? Is there something to keep the lines open in the future? It's a great question. I'll lob that to Becky and Sasha.
The lines are always open to me. I mean, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly as Lane County's transportation planner. It's my job to hear from you so that I can communicate how to address your needs. The interactive map is a limited tool that was developed by our consultants for this planning process. So it will be a snapshot in time to help us build upon the existing conditions analysis and develop recommendations. But I think going into the future, I think one of the things that I'm really excited about with this planning process is making some of the relationships with, I know several people in the room, but I don't know some of you in the room. And so just building relationships with the community is really important to me, and having ongoing conversations. I don't want a plan that just sits on the shelf. I think this is going to take years to implement the vision. And ongoing communications. And so, yeah, just always feel free to reach out to me, and I might not have the answer, but I would really appreciate the connection.
Thank you. All right, then. Well, I'm going to kind of do a reverse invite. You're more than welcome to leave now. We're going to stay, and then we're going to go through another round of the presentation. So I invite you to stay if you'd like to, but otherwise, thank you for taking time. And by all means, there's a lot of information on the website, interactive mapping tool, and please sign up for e-updates because there's a lot to come. Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. So Becky, do you want to wait till 5:05 again? And we'll start again? Okay.
That sounds good.
And then Grace, if there are questions we didn't get to, could we circle back to those in this presentation? I see one from Shane. Great. Right now, we would be at the refreshments table. I miss refreshments that someone else provide. Well, usually we provided.
Have we let the next round of participants in or?
We've had one so far.
Okay,
And it looks like some people are still in from the last session, but I'm not gonna mess with them. I'll just let them decide to leave.
super.
Yeah, I think we have some folks that maybe joined midway, so
Okay,
that's a good call to just leave them
great.
be.
So hang
Virtual
tight.
refreshments.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll start the program here in about 4 minutes. We'll just give a little time for everyone to connect. And if you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat box, please type in your name, and if you represent an agency, include that.
Hey, Becky, while we're waiting, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Have we done an inventory of what neighboring counties have bicycle master plans?
That's a great question. I might have done something like that years ago, but I don't know that I have that at my fingertips. That's a great idea.
And just, I don't know what their timing frame is.
You said neighboring counties, right, Chris?
Neighboring counties. Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we did just you know, back of the envelope, who's got an existing plan. That's something we could find out pretty easily. Yeah. But it wasn't something that we focused on in the guiding framework. Just, yeah.
No, and it might be something that Jeff Malik knows, you know, just from his work, or I'm sure Evan would have an idea too.
So people who've just joined us, if you would please enter your name into the chat. We intentionally have your camera and your microphone off, so it's not a technology problem on your end. And we're just trying to manage the virtual meeting that way. And we'll get started here in a couple minutes, but we're giving a little more time for people to connect. So if you've already entered your name as an introduction, if you've got a question that you want to enter into the chat box, please do so. And we'll be fielding questions at the end of our presentation. And if you don't have any questions, maybe you could share in the chat what you would like to see as a best outcome for this planning process.
I think we could probably launch in if you're ready.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is our first open house for the public on our bicycle master plan. This is Lane County's first ever bicycle master plan. in our first live open house. This is a repeat of the program that we just had at 4 o'clock. Between 4 and 5, we had a presentation, and we're running through that again for people just joining us between 5 and 6. Next slide, please. So for the webinar format, we do have some guidelines to be aware of. Only the project management team has their camera and microphones. Everyone else, please introduce yourself into the chat box and enter questions into the chat box. It's the best way for us to keep track, and we'll be answering questions at the end. Please be respectful. If we have any issues with profanity, for example, our facilitator might kick that participant out of the room. We are recording the meeting, and if we aren't able to answer all of the questions in the chat at the end of the program, we will be providing a transcript of the questions along with answers and updating interested parties. So please do sign up on our website for e-updates. That's the best way to stay informed on the project. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, I'll be introducing the project team, but again, wanting to hear who's in the room by the chat box. We'll provide a project overview, a high-level summary of our existing conditions analysis, a tutorial of our online mapping tool. That's the best tool that we have to collect really detailed public comments that we're seeking over the next 5 days. And then we'll open it up for a Q&A with you. Next slide, please. So frequently asked questions that we've heard so far about what's the scope of the projects? Are we looking at county roads within the Eugene-Springfield metro area? Are we looking at mountain and gravel bikes, soft paths? And are we looking at other non-infrastructure barriers to bicycling? Next slide, please. For the scope of the project, we are creating Lane County's first ever bicycle master plan. It will be an amendment to the Lane County Transportation System Plan. So that's our master plan that evaluates our existing Lane County transportation system, where we have deficiencies, where we've identified needs, what our projects are for the next 20 years to serve our community, and what our transportation policies are. When we update our transportation system plan back in 2017, we weren't able to get at the level of detail needed to accommodate bicycling. And so we established just a kind of a cookie cutter approach of we need to have 4-foot wide shoulders. And we know that that's very expensive and not always supported by the community. And so this planning process will help us identify exactly where we need to make investments in changes to our roadway. And also, this plan will be adopted as an amendment to our transportation system plan. So it'll be adopted by the Board of County Commissioners, and that'll give us an opportunity to modify as needed any existing transportation policies or any planned capital projects on our roadways to better meet the recommendations of this plan. And we are looking at county roads because that's what's within our control. So it's our rural roads and paved paths. However, we do know that we need to look at connections to the state highway system, ODOT facilities, and off-road paths. So we are working with regional partners like the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, our Parks Department, and Oregon Department of Transportation, so that we can work together to identify the best way to meet the community needs for bicycling. Our goals for this plan is to provide a safe and comfortable network for people who bike and for all roadway users, a connected regional system between rural communities, to have an equitable system that's convenient and safe and affordable, knowing that some people rely on bicycling as their sole means of transportation, realizing the economic opportunities with bicycle tourism and the public health benefits from expanded active transportation. Next slide, please. The scope is all of rural Lane County, so from the coast to the Cascades. And we are specifically not looking at the shaded area surrounding the Eugene Springfield metro area because those cities have their own master plans, and we are instead working with staff from those cities to coordinate and look more closely at the transitions between the rural and the urban environment. Next slide, please. For the planning context, so I mentioned the transportation system plan. That's our state mandated 20-year master plan for our transportation policies and the projects that we need over a 20-year period, how this plan will be adopted as an amendment to that plan. We also have a safety action plan that was adopted around the same time as our transportation system plan, when we learned that we had a high number of fatal and severe injury crashes in rural Lane County. And so an emphasis area of our transportation safety action plan is focused on vulnerable users, specifically people walking and on bikes. And it includes a wider range of solutions, not just engineering, but education efforts. And so this plan will support both of these plans by identifying the best way to help support people bicycling in rural Lane County. Next slide, please. So all of the rules and the regulations and existing policies and plans by Lane County and other agencies, we reviewed all of that. We reviewed the available fundings, what are the future funding scenarios, who are our range of bicycle users, from mountain biking to commuters, to develop vision, goals, and objectives, and the major themes that came out of that research around safety, comfort, connectivity, equity, tourism, economic development, shaped those initial purpose and goal statements that I started with. All of this is documented in what we call our guiding framework, and that is available on the project webpage. And you'll be hearing next from Chris about public involvement, and then you'll be hearing from Derek about existing conditions analysis. And how we'll use this guiding framework is the things that we have to accomplish, that we want to accomplish, that we need to meet. We'll look at that with what does the data tell us we need to do, and then what does the community tell us that they want and need to do, and we'll reconcile all of that and weigh it against this guiding framework as we launch into the next phase of the planning process in developing recommendations. But right now we're in the public involvement phase of collecting information, which is super important. So I'm going to pass it on to Chris to talk about the public involvement piece.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Chris Wachi. I'm serve on the Alta's project team as the public involvement lead. And in an earlier session, Grace mentioned this as the dream project, and it really is to be a part of this first bicycle master plan for Lane County. So Lane County, the mighty roiled waters of the Pacific, all the way to the sky-stabbing mountains of the Cascades. It's a huge county. There's over 4,700 square miles of this county. And it's an enormous size. So I want to just say a couple caveats about, I'm just trying to, sorry to do this in the middle of a presentation. I wanted to say that there were a few challenges because when we originally scoped this project, it wasn't during a pandemic. And so we've been able to creatively adapt it and still have the breadth and depth of public involvement that this plan really warrants, of which today is just one piece of what I'll review. So our TAC representation within that, the size of Connecticut, Lane County, you have a patchwork of land ownership, state, city, county, federal, tribal. And within that, many agencies within the state, many agencies within the federal government. So our TAC representation really was intended to have technical advisors from not only cities and the jurisdictions, but also with some of the entities that work countywide, such as Travel Lane County, for instance, as well as Lane Council of Governments, the scope of how many counties that they, the COG incorporates. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of public involvement. As I mentioned, the Technical Advisory Committee, who has been such a valuable group of people providing their expertise on products that are coming out, including the public involvement plan. We started off with some stakeholder interviews to have community representatives and other representatives from targeted communities review what we were proposing and to add to it, talk to us about ways to leverage the outreach. What are some audiences that aren't captured? And so that was very valuable to create the current public involvement plan. If you are not on the e-update list, please sign up for it. You can send Becky an email, you can do it online, but that's going to be the best way to stay well-versed in some of the upcoming input opportunities for the plan. For the stakeholder focus groups, we had a series, well, actually, we're still in the midst of doing stakeholder focus groups in Cottage Grove, Crestville, Veneta and Elmira is coming up. We did one in Oak Ridge, Westford, Lowell, really to have a more in-depth conversation with the community and community representatives in those areas, and then augmented it not only with this live session, but with a 2-week online open house, which Derek will talk to you about in just a little bit. Our equity approach and targeted outreach has developed some really valuable and incredible relationships with some community organizations that are serving Title VI and environmental justice communities. So we've been working with Homes for Good, St. Vincent de Paul for mobile homes. We worked with family resource centers, as well as with schools. And Cassidy Mills, as the Lane Council of Government Safe Routes to School rural coordinator, has been fabulous, helping us reach out to schools and families throughout the county. That targeted outreach has had bilingual hard copies for households that do not have computers. And we've been working through a variety of distribution networks, which we'll pick up. And perhaps folks have seen some lawn signs. We have about 75 of them dispersed throughout the county, highlighting the public open house. And if you see one knocked over, could you please put them back up? Because it was blowing pretty hard when we were putting them out there last weekend. Finally, the public open house, as I mentioned, March 8th through the 22nd. And then again, we'll have one in summer. And again, you'll really want to get on that e-update list to know when these are upcoming. There will be a public hearing and comment period prior to the board's deliberation on whether to adopt the plan and recommendations or not. So it's a pretty high level snapshot of what we've been doing for public involvement. I'm happy to answer any questions, throw it in the chat box. But for now, Derek's going to talk to us about existing conditions.
And before we do that, one of the objectives tonight was to meet the planners, and I failed to introduce these talking heads. We're just so excited to get into it and hear from you. But I'll just pause this for a moment. I'm Becky Taylor. I'm a senior transportation planner for Lane County. I led the transportation system plan update in 2017 and leading for the county this bicycle master plan. Chris?
Cogito, we're based here in Eugene, serving as a public involvement lead on the Alta team.
Grace?
Hi, everybody. Grace Stainback. I'm a transportation planner with Alta Planning and Design, supporting the consultant team on this project, and so excited to be here. As I mentioned, my dream project, all of our dream project, really.
Sasha?
Hi, Sasha Vartanian, Lane County Transportation Planning. We are so excited for this project and to get all of your input. It's really essential to the process. Thanks for spending an hour with us tonight.
And Derek?
Hi, everyone. I'm Derek Abe. I'm a transportation planner with Alta Planning and Design and a part of the wonderful project management team we've got here in front of you tonight. Thanks again for joining us. All right, and with that, thanks, Becky. We'll launch into a high-level summary of our existing conditions work. So we have just published a version of our existing conditions analysis memo, is what we're calling it. And you can find that full document on our project website. So that's lanecountybmp.com. And it will give you a lot more detail about the things that I'm going to talk about here shortly, about all of the analysis and kind of data wrangling that we've been doing over the last few months to get a better understanding of what cycling conditions look like in Lane County today. So the memo itself is broken up into several sections based on the types of analysis that we performed. So we started with an in-depth look at the existing network or the existing bicycle system throughout Lane County. We want to get a better understanding of where we currently have bicycle facilities and where we don't, right? That's kind of going to enable us to establish a baseline and we can build on that from there. We performed an equity analysis. So our equity analysis looks at a number of factors to determine areas of higher need. And so what that means is, taking into consideration things like age and ability, income, race, ethnicity, car ownership, right? All of those factors to get a better understanding of where we should be looking when we want to make equitable decisions about our transportation investments. We performed a demand or suitability analysis for bicycles. And so that's looking at where people live and where they work and recreate and shop and go to school and take transit, all the typical activities that we perform throughout our day, right? Our regular trips, not just for riding bikes for fun or exercise, but really kind of centering this as a transportation focus bicycle planning effort. Of course, we looked at safety to understand where historically on the Lane County network, we've had crashes, right? Severe crashes that resulted in injury or even death. Obviously safety is one of our top priorities. And so getting a baseline understanding of that was critical as well. We followed that up with what we call a bicycle level traffic stress analysis or LTS analysis. And what that is a measure of the, as the name implies, level of stress or conversely, the level of comfort that a person on a bike would experience on a given road, right? Based on roadway conditions. And so we took all of that analysis and what that allows us to do then is begin to identify some opportunities and constraints. And those opportunities and constraints are what will eventually help us to develop the recommended bike network. And so earlier there's a question, I think from Shane, maybe asking, is this going to result in a new Lane County bike network map? And the short answer is yes. This is going to allow us to make recommendations about where proposed improvements are needed and where current deficiencies or gaps in the bike network exist today, right? It takes into account all of the existing facilities, all of the planned and proposed facilities, and then is going to recommend some new ones as well, ideally, with your help. So with that, I'm going to launch into a very, very high level summary of the analysis. Here is a map of the entire county and the bike network. As you can see in the legend on the left there, the existing bike network is composed of a variety of facility types. The line work that you may be gravitating towards on the map is the blue and the green, that really dense concentration in the Eugene Springfield metro area. And then you see, a lot of purple lines purple squiggly lines, and those are proposed routes that have been identified in other planning efforts as a part of the East Lane bicycle tourism study, for example, that really kind of focus on those connections between cities, between areas that people are wanting to travel to and from. Okay, so that gives us a pretty good understanding of the types of connections that people have identified already, where there may be a latent or explicit demand for. The equity analysis, so this is a map of our composite sketch, which shows kind of all of those indicators that I mentioned earlier: age, income, race, ethnicity, car ownership, education, all of these things kind of aggregated into a single map. And so the areas that you're seeing in the darker colors with the higher score are those areas where we've identified a higher need. And so as you can imagine, they tend to kind of concentrate in the urban centers where we have more people, where it's denser. So that isn't necessarily a surprise, but it does also show some other areas throughout the county where we may want to take a closer look, because they are identified here as areas with special needs. So, and again, this is a very high level map. We have some insets zoomed in the report itself that you can go to get a better understanding of what we found there. The demand analysis here is kind of a heat map showing the darker blue areas of higher demand. Again, this is another composite map that layers all of those things, like where people are living and working, shopping, going to school. And again, you can see that the concentrations are where people primarily live and work. But then you also see the roads, right? Those are actually roads, not rivers. And those are roads typically where people are already riding their bikes. I think you'll find that if you compared this to Strava heat map, for example, that there'd be a lot of overlap. The next map is the LTS map, the level of traffic stress analysis map. And so we've color coded the roadway segments based on how comfortable they are. The blue and green line work that you see on the map are those roadway segments that have been selected or identified as the lower stress segments, the more comfortable segments, where a person, people riding bikes of all ages and abilities would be comfortable riding. And then on the opposite end of the scale, the red line work are those more stressful environments, roadway environments, where really only the most experienced, the most confident riders are going to be comfortable, and typically where they're riding today. And then of course we've got some gravel county roads as well that may be unpaved, that would warrant a closer look based on the types of connections that we're wanting to make as a part of the future network. Okay, so high level summary. We know that many of the rural Lane County roadway system is on high-speed rural roads where the statutory speed limit is 55 miles an hour, right? And we know that that is, all else considered, that is a really difficult, challenging riding environment for most types of people on bikes, for most types of cyclists. But turns out that some of these county roads, because of their rural nature, because they have a lot lower traffic volumes, they can often be pretty comfortable when certain conditions exist, when there aren't as many cars, when you have a wider shoulder to ride on, and so that presents us with a lot of both opportunities and constraints, right? As we're developing those types of connections, we want to be paying particular attention to those to the nature of those roadways, what the speeds are, what the volumes are, and whether there are bike facilities, bike lanes, shoulders present or not. The areas of demand and the areas of higher need tend to be in our larger urban centers, because that's where we have a higher density of not only people but cyclists as well. But we also know that there are areas of demand and higher need in lower density areas throughout the county, in the rural parts of the counties, right? And so the transitions between those urban centers and rural areas are going to be especially important for us to think about, you know, ensuring that a bike facility doesn't end when you cross a county or a city line, for instance, right? That there's some continuity and consistency with the cycling experience wherever you are in the county. You know, and obviously, you know, because it is a rural network, because there are so many roadways without any bike facilities to begin with, we know that paved shoulders are going to be an important tool in our toolkit. You know, we don't have unlimited funds with this project, and so we can't build protected bike lanes and paths everywhere, right? So we need to be really strategic about the types of facilities that we're recommending and what's appropriate given the type of ridership that we would expect or that we want to see in the future. And much of the analysis highlights, again, the need for us to continue to partner with all of our agency partners. You saw the TAC list, you know, partnering with ODOT, partnering with all of the cities, with the Forest Service even, to make sure that the connections that are not on the Lane County network are also going to advance through partnerships, through that relationship building. Because as we, you know, again, you know, the scope of this project is on, you know, is constrained to the Road County network where we can spend those funds on those types of improvements. Okay, so where are we going with all of that? Well, that is where you come in, and where the public engagement phase of work is leading. What we're going to be doing is launching into the next phase of work to develop recommendations for the bike system, proposing projects, developing that proposed network list of projects and the map. And so we've developed an online mapping tool that some of you may have already participated in, to get more input, specific input about conditions on the roads that you are familiar with, that you are experienced with, and maybe concerned about, right? So I'm gonna walk us through very quickly. I'm just doing a time check here. Yeah, very quickly, our online tool to give you a little better idea of how it works and what we're trying to get out of it here. Okay, so if you go to the LaneCountyBMP.com project website, you'll see a link to the virtual open house here at the very top. There are also some instructions in Spanish on how to access that on your phone, on your mobile app, because it is a little bit of a different environment on the phone. When you get there, when you click on that button, it'll take you to the map, or the online open house as we're calling it. You click on this begin open house, and it asks you to fill out this very brief, you know, handful of questions, and that just gives us a better idea of who you are and what your interests are as it relates to bicycling in the county. Takes less than 5 minutes. You click submit. If you don't have the time to do that or don't want to do that, you can all skip the survey. That's step one. And that will bring you to the map here. So there are 2 steps here, and step 3 is the final step. But I want to walk through some of the functions of the map itself that you see here before I get into that. There are some buttons at the top here to change your view. So I will click on a few of these to show you the legend. The most important functionality on the map, I would say here, is in the bottom here. These are the layers that you can see and toggle on and off. And that'll help you to reference where you are, get a better understanding of the roadways that we're talking about. And then also those last 3 rows are those the results of those maps from the analysis that I just walked through. So demand and equity and level of traffic stress that allow you to see how the roadway network kind of stacks on top of that. So for example, you can see if you turn on these layers, what the conditions of the roads look like today. The most important layer is the county roads layer, and that is the blue line work that you see here. So that is the universe of all of the roads that we, as a part of this project, have may have an opinion about, that we would like to hear from you about. And so step 2 is asking you to click on certain roads that you know about and tell us more about them. When you click on that roadway segment, it'll give you a number of options. You can tell us that you currently ride there. You can tell us you'd like to, but don't. You can leave a number of other comments. It's pretty open-ended. It'll ask you about roadway conditions, and then you click save, and you're done. If somebody else clicks on that, they can see that that you've already entered a comment, and they can see that comment. They can add another comment. It's almost a way to like that comment, if you will, or to add to it. That's step 2. You can click on as many county roads as you want. Tell us as much about them as possible, and please do be as specific as you can, because that's going to help us as we begin to think about projects. Step 3 is recognizing that not everything you have to say about your bicycle experience or your travel patterns or your routes or the destinations that you'd like to go to are going to be on the Lane County network. We understand that, right? Not all of your trips can be for going to school or for going to work, but we want to also know about those areas that may be, on city streets or on ODOT facilities that may provide a critical connection, that may provide a way for you to connect some of these county routes. And so if you click on one of these buttons on the left here, add a destination, add a challenge, or add a driving concern, you are going to be able to drop a pin somewhere and leave a comment. Okay. And again, you can leave as many comments as you like. The more specific, the better. If you go to the upper right here and click the show comments, you can see where other people have already commented. You can see where their comments are. And if you've got lots of time and lots of interest and are super excited about this, you can go ahead and read all the comments. They publish immediately after you click that save or submit button. So you should be able to see it in real time. That is the end of the open house. So again, really encourage you to tell all your friends and family about this tool. We spent a lot of time developing it, and we think we're going to get a lot of awesome feedback. It looks like we've already started to have the comments roll in. So please, after this, dive in if you haven't already. With that, let's go back to the presentation here. I think we're going to move into our question and answer segment of the evening. So I'll let you, Chris,
Great.
take that away.
There was a comment about interested in the urban-rural interface, and that's come up a few times in other of our focus groups. Becky, do you have anything to say about the connectivity and the importance of it, or some of the issues around it? We've touched on a few of them, but it's not just the ODOT roads, it's some other potential roads as well that could serve invaluable connections.
Yes, we are going to be looking really carefully at transition areas and connection areas. So the comment about the transition area between rural Lane County and Eugene, I think just looking at where do the systems connect and what types of improvements are needed to support that transition. And then working with staff from the City of Eugene serving on our technical advisory committee to develop kind of those site-specific recommendations or solutions. is how I envision this plan supporting that.
And for some of the folks who have been involved in bicycle tourism, do you have any specific questions or desires that I recognize some names that you would want out of the plan? And if so, if you could type it in. One of our TAC members is Jeff Malik from Travel Lane County, and there's been a lot of work done on bicycle tourism as well about designated routes. And the importance of signage on those routes.
One other thing I'll add, Chris, kind of relates to the tourism piece, but also the urban to rural transitions question that's come up a couple times is, our understanding is that, as we look at the bike network, as we look at the existing network, and as we look at the Lane County road system, that there are often only, a few real ways to make a connection to the urban center, to Eugene Springfield, for example, right? It could be highway, it could be county roads, it could be back roads, it could be gravel roads. But oftentimes it's going to be limited because that's just the nature of the roadway network. It's, topography, for example. And so what we need to do as a part of this, as we develop the recommendations, is to think about what are going to be the safest, most comfortable roads that we can take. What are the most direct roads that we can take? What are the existing conditions of bike facilities on those roads, if they're even there, right? What are the shoulder conditions like? We're going to be factoring all of these things as we think about proposals for specific connections. We've heard earlier, how do I get from where I live to, I want to ride to Eugene Springfield, right? I want to ride to Cottage Grove. The options may be limited, right? The reasonable options may be limited. So the more specific we can be about the issues that we see along those roads and along those options, the better, right? Mm. And that's of course related to tourism, right? Because folks traveling longer distances on bikes are often pre-planning their trips, right? Are following designated routes or ride reports, are looking at maps, and a lot of the lines on those maps are telling them to go a certain way, right? A lot of that's already been really well vetted, right? We want to also be really respectful of all of the time and energy that's gone into the bike planning around things like bike tourism in the past, because that is like a wealth of information that we could be building off of. So yeah, the more information that we can gather that we don't have around that stuff is also really well appreciated.
I think something that's been really interesting too is how often e-bikes have come up in the discussion, and will the plan look at e-bikes and if there's any infrastructure needs for e-bikes or connections to transit having an e-bike? How does that work if or any connections?
I would so that's a really big question to begin with, and I say that because there are a number of dimensions to that question that we consider that we have to consider as planners and designers when we're thinking about bike facilities, right? So e-bikes, absolutely right. They are becoming more and more ubiquitous every day. Fortunately, there are standards being developed around them. So the parameters, the design parameters of these particular vehicles, of these devices are better understood. And that means certain things for the width of a path when we're designing a path or a trail, off-street path, right? Providing enough space for bikes to pass, right? So that you're not getting, you don't have e-bikes zooming by you, buzzing by you. On the other hand, it also means, e-bikes that are going to enable us to, more of us, I should say, enable us to travel farther, easier, and with less effort in some cases, over larger distances. And so the range of our network and the connections that we enable through this project should also take into should also be taken into account there.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know if your question was specific to tourism, Chris, but again, you know, there even for local systems where, you know, e-bikes are the demand for them is outpacing supply. You know, comfortable facilities that can accommodate multiple speeds, bikes of all form factors, shapes, sizes, trailers, cargo bikes, all of this is going to be really important. So I could talk about this for a long time. I'll stop there.
Sasha, could I ask you, you know, there's the question, what would you like to have as an outcome of this plan? So Sasha, from your perspective, and then hearing from Becky from the planning and leading the planning team, I'd love to hear what you folks have to say.
Absolutely. Well, I think having a real guide to projects that have been vetted through this process that we can prioritize and where while our road fund dollars are limited, it looks like at the state and federal level, there's going to be more and more opportunities for funding bike and bike projects. So projects for people who bike and walk specifically. And so if we have, through this planning process, we'll have a vetted list that we can aggressively pursue, which is really exciting. And in the long run, it really helps us align the vision of our transportation system plan and our safety plan that Becky talked to earlier, with making our transportation system more accessible to all users. So you don't just have to own a car to be able to use the 1,400 miles of roadway within Lane County. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I see Dawn is in the room. And when I see Dawn's name, I automatically think of the Row River Road and the Row River Trail owned by BLM, and the corridor plan that was underway when I first started working for Lane County in 2015. And the big ribbon cutting event was really exciting for me, as just starting with Lane County, all the work that Dawn and other community members in Cottage Grove worked to support Lane County and BLM in that effort. It just really highlights for me, like, we want to do that, but on steroids as part of this plan. Like I really want to prevent people from dying on our roads before we do something. I want to know where the greatest needs are, where we can strategically make improvements that make a big difference, and not be responding to someone died trying to, you know, cross this road at this location on their bike. Or Territorial is another example of where, you know, Lane County didn't have jurisdiction at the time of Territorial when there was a tragic bicycle fatality there. But we worked with the community to develop a corridor plan. So both the Territorial corridor plan and the Row River corridor plan were in response to fatalities that occurred by people trying to bike on a facility that didn't have the infrastructure to support them, and develop some recommendations. And over the years, like, I've been really proud to work for Lane County, because we take things on and we keep chasing that external funding and applying for grants. And so it's really important for me through this planning process is to hear, where do people want to see change and what kind of change, because we do really need to focus our limited resources to achieve those outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Yeah, I recall, I think it was in our first focus group that to answer the question that Grace posed, someone highlighted that they really wanted a plan that had some flexibility in it, that was had some kind of agility that would be able to address changing conditions, whether that's new funding coming down the way through various state programs or federal new federal dollars. But that's something that Becky, you don't want to plan on your shelf. You want it on your desk and you want it marked up with highlighters. And so this type of feedback really helps shape that plan and that project list, which is really critical for when that funding comes available, that it's in the pipeline ready to go. Grace, do you have anything you want to highlight from your question that folks added?
New question here in the chat box. If bike paths leave the roadway and become remote, will there be consideration for emergency response, such as medical or fire vehicles? So asking a little bit about accessibility for emergency response and safety and rescue.
I can tackle that one and then let others folks chime in. So I think most the projects that will come out of this plan will likely be, if they're not directly on the shoulder, it will be adjacent to the roadway. So it will be accessible for emergency services. A future partnership and work that has not started is working with Lane County Parks to look at soft path bike networks. So that would be yet to come.
There's a question about a priority matrix that will evaluate project funding based on equity, connection to the system, and other criteria. And Safe Routes to School Priority Matrix has an example, and I think the ODOT has recently developed a Transportation Disadvantaged Index too. So that's a question, Becky, back to you and Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of our project deliverables, is developing an implementation strategy, and how do we prioritize all of the recommendations, and how do we prioritize based on our guiding principles? How do we make sure that we're supporting populations that need it the most, and so that we're not missing something really important?
Yeah, and yeah, like Becky said, you know, the matrix and the criteria that are in that matrix will largely be based on that guiding framework, on all the goals and objectives of the plan, right? So we refer back to that to help us determine what projects rise to the top, which are the most important ones, and then which are the ones that, you know, maybe less important or could wait a little bit longer, or be implemented on a longer time frame. So yeah, that's really kind of the goal of this process, is to make sure that what we end up with reflects the goals and the values and the things that we've heard from the community along the way. Yeah.
And then also just thinking about our transportation system plan, you know, there's just millions of dollars worth of projects that, like, how do you prioritize all of that, all of those needs? They're all needed within 20 years. And I'm hoping that this plan will have a lot more strategic investment recommendations, but at the same time, there's probably going to be a lot of big ticket needs that we don't know where the funding will come from. But part of our implementation strategy will be looking at what are the funding sources out there. You know, some funding sources might really be targeted to promoting access to federal lands, the Federal Lands Access Program. So we'll be looking at, okay, where do we have project needs that align with that particular funding criteria, so that when those funding opportunities open up, here's our list of projects that fit within those parameters is another example of how funding might also help shape implementation of the recommendations.
So we have one, to stay with our time frame, one final question from Dawn, and he's bringing up the question that we've heard also: will this address other biking amenities? The fix-it, the softer infrastructure, fix-it station, signage of routes and places to find food and drink.
That's a great question, because it isn't just about bike lanes, right? You need all of the above. You need all of the support facilities. You need things like bike parking. You need wayfinding signage. All of those facilities types are going to be needed for us to get more people on bikes and to make them feel comfortable and supported. So short answer is yes, we'll be making a number of recommendations around the softer infrastructure and the support facilities as well.
Before Becky, you wrap it up, did you want to put a little tickler for the 30th active transportation corridor?
Yeah, we got federal funding to launch another planning effort specific to the 30th Avenue corridor around the Lane Community College Basin. And we'll be working with the community in a similar but smaller focused planning effort to develop some recommendations for improving conditions on 30th. So if you're interested in that, let me know and we'll get you started on our interested parties list. Actually, Chris is going to be managing public involvement for that project as well. So stay tuned, more fun coming on that.
So Sasha and Becky, if you'd just like to make any final comments.
I just leave it to Becky to wrap up. I just want to thank you all for your time. I know the last thing you necessarily want to do is be on another virtual meeting, and we really appreciate you joining us today as we navigate this way of life. So sorry we couldn't provide cookies and soft drinks, but in the real open house. But thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you for joining. And if you haven't commented on the comment map yet, please do so. Please encourage your friends to enter comments as well. You know, Lane County, the relationships that we build with the community will help us implement this plan. It I think is going to be much more compelling to decision makers if we have the recommendations informed by community input. So your input really matters. And also we'll be playing a facilitation role with other agencies like Oregon Department of Transportation. And so your comments about where you need to see some improvements on connections between county facilities and state facilities, to the extent that we have public comment documented on that comment map, will really help us with those conversations. So your input really, really matters. Please make the time to do that. It's really important. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
May I make one last just quick comment?
Yeah.
And Derek, could you go to the very start of the presentation? So this is out at Fern Ridge, but because it's St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, that is the pot of gold, is the Lane County Bicycle Master Plan. So thank you all, really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Good night.
Good night.